Rain pounded against the windows of the small apartment in General Santos City, where Manny Pacquiao had returned after yet another international trip. The world champion watched the droplets stream down the glass, remembering the early days of his career, when every penny mattered and every fight was a matter of survival. At 44 years old, the man who had conquered titles in 8 different boxing weight classes felt a different kind of weight on his shoulders, not the weight of gloves or the responsibility of representing the Philippines, but the weight of memories that time had failed to erase. That December afternoon, while leafing through some old newspapers stored in a dusty box, Manny came across a photo that made him stop completely. It was a black and white image from his first professional fight in 1995, when he was just 16 years old. Standing beside him in the ring was Rustico Torrecampo, a veteran boxer who was 35 at the time and already at the end of his career. The age difference between them was nearly 2 decades, making Rustico the oldest opponent Manny would face throughout his entire boxing journey. The memory of that night came flooding back with full force. Rustico had been kind to young Manny before the fight, offering advice on how to position himself in the ring and how to control his nerves. It was ironic to think that a man about to fight against him would show such kindness and concern. Manny clearly remembered the veteran's words, who had spoken about the importance of always maintaining humility, regardless of how many victories he might accumulate throughout his career. Rustico had lost that fight by technical knockout in the second round, but his dignity and sportsmanship remained intact. After the fight, he warmly congratulated Manny, saying he had seen something special in the young fighter and was certain that someday he would go very far. Those were prophetic words that echoed in Manny's mind to this day, especially now that his active career had come to an end. Driven by sudden curiosity, and perhaps by a feeling of gratitude that had been stored away for nearly 3 decades, Manny decided he needed to find out what had happened to Rustico Torrecampo. He picked up his phone and began making calls to former promoters and acquaintances from the boxing world, determined to find the man who had been his first opponent and, in a way, his first mentor in the sport that would change his life forever. The first attempts to locate Rustico Torrecampo were unsuccessful. Manny spoke with various boxing promoters, veteran trainers, and even sports journalists who had been covering the sport for decades, but few remembered the name or knew current information about the former boxer's whereabouts. Frustration began to grow, but Manny's determination remained unwavering. He knew that finding Rustico was more than just satisfying curiosity. It was a way to honor that special moment that had marked the beginning of his journey. Freddie Roach, his longtime trainer, suggested that Manny search through the archives of the Philippines, Games and Amusements Board, the body responsible for regulating professional boxing in the country. It was a brilliant idea that yielded the first concrete results. In the official records, Manny discovered that Rustico had been born in Cebu City and that his last registered fight had been in 1998, 3 years after facing young Pacquiao. From this information, the search gained new direction. Through contacts in Cebu, Manny managed to locate some former boxers who had known Rustico during his active years in the sport. The information he received was disheartening. Rustico had faced severe financial difficulties after retiring from boxing, had worked various informal jobs to support his family, and his health had deteriorated significantly over the years. Neurological problems, common among former boxers, had affected his ability to work regularly. A former boxer named Lauro Dignos provided the most valuable information. Rustico was living in a small community on the outskirts of Cebu City, in very precarious conditions. Lauro explained that Rustico had lost his wife a few years ago due to complications related to diabetes, and now lived only with his youngest daughter, Maricel, who worked as a vendor in a local market to support both of them. The family's financial situation was desperate, and Rustico needed constant medical care that they simply couldn't afford. The news hit Manny like a punch to the stomach. Thinking that the man who had been so kind and encouraging in his first professional fight was going through such hardship caused deep pain in his heart. That very night, Manny made a decision that would change not only the lives of Rustico and his family, but also touch the hearts of millions of people around the world. He cancelled all his commitments for the following week and began making preparations for a trip to Cebu City. Manny's trip to Cebu was discreet, accompanied only by his closest aide and a small security team. He had specifically requested that there be no publicity or media coverage, as he wanted the meeting to be genuine and private. The address that Lauro had provided led Manny to a peripheral area of the city, where houses were simple and streets were unpaved. The difference between that environment and the luxurious hotels and gyms that Manny frequented on his international travels was striking. The house where Rustico lived was a small structure of wood and concrete, with only 2 rooms and a roof that clearly needed repairs. Manny felt a tightness in his chest as he observed the precarious conditions of the place. When he and his team approached, some neighbors began to gather, curious to understand what was happening. The presence of cars in the community was unusual, and the arrival of a well-dressed group would certainly attract attention. Maricel, Rustico's daughter, was hanging clothes on the line when she noticed the unusual movement in front of her house. She was a woman of about 30 years old, with her face marked by worry and the fatigue of someone who carries responsibilities too heavy for her age. When Manny approached and introduced himself, she initially didn't believe that it was really the famous boxer. The reality of having Manny Pacquiao standing in front of her humble residence seemed too impossible to be true. Inside the house, Rustico was lying on a simple bed, clearly debilitated by the health problems he faced. At 63 years old, the man who had once been a strong and determined boxer now showed evident signs of the cumulative effects of years of fighting and lack of adequate medical care. When Maricel informed him about Manny's visit, Rustico's eyes lit up with a mixture of surprise, joy, and disbelief. The meeting between the 2 former boxers was deeply emotional. Manny knelt beside Rustico's bed and held his hands, which trembled slightly due to neurological problems. Both men had tears in their eyes as they recognized each other after nearly 3 decades. Rustico, even with his speech compromised by his medical condition, managed to express how happy he was to see again that young man he had faced in the ring and who had become a world boxing legend. During the hours he spent at Rustico's house, Manny heard stories that broke his heart. Maricel told about the difficulties they faced daily, from the lack of money to buy the necessary medications for her father, to the constant worry about basic bills like electricity and water. She worked 7 days a week at the local market, but even so, the money was never enough to cover all the family's needs. Rustico had spent years trying to hide his deteriorated health condition, afraid of being a burden to his daughter. He remembered clearly the fight against Manny and had always followed the young boxer's meteoric career through television and newspapers. On several occasions, Rustico had commented to Maricel about that special night when he had faced someone who would become one of the greatest legends in world sports, always expressing genuine pride in having been part, however small, of Manny's history. The family's living conditions were even more precarious than Manny had imagined. The house had no air conditioning or adequate fans, making Cebu's hot nights practically unbearable for Rustico, whose medical condition made body temperature control more difficult. The shared bathroom was in terrible condition, and the kitchen basically consisted of a small gas stove and an old refrigerator that only worked sporadically. Maricel revealed that there were times when they had to choose between buying medications for Rustico or enough food for both of them. The young woman had developed a complex strategy of priorities, alternating between basic needs depending on the urgency of each situation. She had never married or started a family of her own, dedicating her life entirely to caring for her sick father. Her dream of studying nursing had been abandoned years ago due to the impossibility of balancing work, studies, and the necessary care. Manny also observed that Rustico kept some newspaper clippings about his most important victories, carefully stored in a small shoebox. It was touching to realize that even amid so many difficulties, the former boxer had followed and celebrated each of Manny's achievements over the years. That demonstration of genuine admiration and affection made Manny feel even more determined to do something significant to change the situation of this family that had suffered so much in silence. That night, in his hotel in Cebu City, Manny couldn't sleep. The images of the precarious house, Rustico's debilitated state, and Maricel's daily sacrifice kept playing through his mind like a movie that repeated endlessly. He thought about the irony of fate. While his boxing career had led him to accumulate millions of dollars and worldwide recognition, the man who had been his first opponent and mentor was living in conditions that no human being should face. Manny called his wife, Jinky, who was in the Philippines, and told her in detail about the meeting with Rustico and the conditions in which the family was living. Jinky, knowing well her husband's generous heart, wasn't surprised when he expressed his desire to substantially help the Torrecampo family. She supported him completely in his decision, reminding him that they had always believed in the importance of giving back the blessings they had received throughout their lives. The next day, Manny returned to Rustico's house, this time accompanied by a neurologist specialist who had flown especially from Manila to assess the former boxer's health condition. The consultation revealed that although the neurological damage was irreversible, there were treatments and medications that could significantly improve Rustico's quality of life and slow the progression of his symptoms. The cost of these treatments, however, was completely beyond the family's financial reach. Manny also brought with him an engineer and an architect who made a complete assessment of the house's conditions. The report was disheartening. The structure had serious foundation problems, the electrical system was dangerous, and the plumbing was in critical condition. The professional's recommendation was clear. It would be safer and more economically viable to build a new residence than to try to renovate the existing structure. Without hesitation, Manny made the decision that would completely change the Torrecampo family's life. He committed to building a new house for them, equipped with all the facilities necessary for Rustico's medical care, in addition to fully funding his medical treatment for the coming years. Furthermore, he established a fund to ensure that Maricel could resume her nursing studies and have financial security to dedicate herself to both studies and caring for her father. Construction of the new house for the Torrecampo family began just 2 weeks after Manny's decision. He hired a renowned construction company from Cebu and personally supervised every detail of the project, ensuring that the residence would be not only comfortable, but also fully adapted to Rustico's special needs. The house would be built on the same lot, but with a completely new, modern and functional structure. The project included 3 spacious bedrooms, one of them specially designed for Rustico, with an adapted bathroom, air conditioning system, and enough space for medical equipment. The kitchen was planned to be fully functional and modern, with new appliances and a design that would make Maricel's daily life easier. A cozy, small living room completed the project, creating an environment where the family could receive visitors and enjoy leisure moments. During the construction period, Manny provided temporary accommodation for Rustico and Maricel in a rented apartment near the site, ensuring they had comfort and dignity while awaiting completion of the new residence. He also immediately began Rustico's medical treatment, hiring a multidisciplinary team that included a neurologist, physiotherapist, and home nurse. News of Manny's generosity began to spread discreetly through the local community, but he had specifically asked that there be no media disclosure until everything was completed. He wanted the family to be able to enjoy the transformation without the pressure and turmoil that media attention would inevitably bring. The neighbors, however, couldn't hide their admiration and gratitude seeing one of the Philippines' most famous sons personally caring for a forgotten former boxer. Maricel could hardly believe the radical change her life was experiencing. For the first time in years, she could sleep peacefully, knowing that her father was receiving the necessary medical care and that she would have the opportunity to fulfill her dream of becoming a nurse. Tears of joy mixed with the deep gratitude she felt for Manny, who had appeared like an angel in their lives when they most needed hope. The completion of the Torrecampo family's new house coincided with a notable improvement in Rustico's condition. The proper medications and regular physiotherapy treatment had stabilized his neurological symptoms, and he showed more energy and lucidity than he had displayed in years. The adapted house allowed him to move with greater safety and independence, restoring a degree of dignity that he had gradually lost over years of illness. Maricel had enrolled in a nursing course at a respected university in Cebu City, finally realizing the dream she had postponed for so long. Manny had offered to fully fund her studies, in addition to providing a monthly allowance that would ensure she could dedicate herself to her studies without needing to work at the market. The young woman was determined to graduate with distinction and eventually specialize in neurological care. Inspired by the experience with her father, the story of Manny's generosity finally reached the ears of local journalists, who began investigating and documenting the transformation of the Torrecampo family. When Manny realized it would be impossible to maintain secrecy much longer, he decided to authorize limited coverage of the story, with the condition that the focus be on the importance of caring for sports veterans and not on his person. The first report about the story was published in a local Cebu newspaper and quickly gained national attention. The touching narrative of the world champion who had returned to help his first opponent resonated deeply with the Filipino public, who had always admired Manny not only for his sporting achievements, but also for his humility and generosity. Social media began buzzing with emotional comments and praise for the boxer's attitude. The impact of the story extended far beyond the Philippines. International media outlets began covering the story, highlighting it as an extraordinary example of gratitude, humility, and social responsibility. Sports commentators from around the world praised Manny for demonstrating that true champions are defined not only by their victories in the ring, but also by their actions outside of it. 6 months after the completion of the new house, Manny organized a small inauguration ceremony, inviting only close family members, some veteran former boxers, and local media representatives. The most emotional moment was when Rustico, walking with much more stability thanks to medical treatment, embraced Manny for a long time, whispering words of gratitude that made both men cry openly. During the ceremony, Manny gave a simple but deeply touching speech about the importance of never forgetting those who contributed to our journey, however small that contribution might seem at the time. He emphasized that Rustico had been much more than just his first opponent. He had been his first teacher about what it meant to be a true sportsman and a man of character. The Torrecampo family story inspired other Filipino sports personalities to create similar initiatives to help former athletes in need. A gradual movement began to form, focused on creating support systems for sports veterans who faced financial or health difficulties. Manny became a vocal advocate for the cause, using his influence to raise awareness among authorities and business people about the importance of caring for those who dedicated their lives to sports. Maricel graduated from nursing school with honors and got a job at a hospital specializing in neurology in Cebu City. She continued living with her father, but now as a qualified professional who could actively contribute to his medical care. Her dream of specializing in neurology was becoming reality, and she frequently expressed her intention to someday open a community clinic to help other families facing situations similar to what they had experienced. The friendship between Manny and Rustico flourished in the following months, with the champion regularly visiting the family whenever he was in the Philippines. Rustico became a kind of informal counselor to Manny, offering the wisdom accumulated over decades of life and boxing experiences. Their conversations frequently revolved around themes like legacy, purpose, and the importance of using success to make a difference in other people's lives. For Manny, those moments represented some of the most valuable and rewarding experiences of his post-boxing life, constantly reminding him that true victories happen outside the ring, when we use our blessings to bless others.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.